right, so welcome everyone to session number 4. In today's sessions, we'll be going through sort of our usual format. So start off with some ideas, and then we're going to talk about modifying the default system portal, sort of differences between what I'm calling regular business rules versus workflow business rules, and then a brief introduction on SQL custom coding. So as usual, my name is Nick Room, consultant here with RGR Innovations, doing the presentation. A little bit about RGR, founded in 2004, I've been a BMC partner ever since, and we specialize in primarily ITSM related industries, and then their associated counterparts, so ITAM, CLM, etc. On our session last month, session number 3, so kind of overview of what we covered last time. So again, ideas, highlights. I always like to point out 5 ideas every month. So those are the ideas we covered with importing validate only, the ability to deactivate users, creating issues from Instant Talk, mandatory comments on voting, and the ability to map all user attributes when we do an import. We then talked a little bit about the email marker line. So both in respect to the subject line text that you would need to update tickets, as well as the marker line at the very top of an email that you receive, you know, hey, when replying, please type your text above. We talked a little bit about Tomcat URL redirects. Of course, there's many different ways to do that. I had shown you guys one way to do that with the index.jsp file, and showed a little bit about FootPrints license usage tracking. As usual, prior sessions, and while all sessions are recorded, prior sessions are available at rgrinnovations.com/webinars. A little bit new to the format, and I'm going to be doing this going forward. So on my next slide over here, we have next time on session 5. So, you know, again, the ideas I'll be highlighting and the topics. So working with broadcasts, dealing with UI and console customizations, and going over the types of business rules. You can register for session 5 at this nice long URL link that you cannot click on at the moment. I will post it in chat in a little bit, and as well in the summary email that you'll get at the end of this webinar, there'll be a link to register for it as well. Session 5 is currently scheduled for March 8th, the second Wednesday of March. Okay, so moving on to our ideas highlights. So these are the ideas that we're going to be looking at this week. So we got new business rule action to unlink records, allow system administrators to use concurrent licenses, the show all button on journalized fields, default criteria filtering for link controls, and role properties to see and hide voting history. So again, the link's there, but I will put them in chat so you can see them. Okay, so let's get started here. So the first feature request, essentially the ability to unlink a record in a business rule. So if you're familiar with after save business rules, we already have an action to link an existing record. And the typical use case there is around tickets submitted from self-service. So tickets submitted from self-service by default will not link the contact the user's logged in as. So we have a business rule to link the user's contact, usually based on user ID. The user ID on the contact record will match the user ID of the logged in user. And so we have that link action to link the contact to the incident. So this request is essentially for the opposite, to be able to unlink a certain record or a certain relationship based on whatever criteria we come up with. The primary use case there would be around CMDB generally. So if I transfer an asset from one contact to another, typically what happens is FootPrints just adds the new contact to the CI without removing the old one. So it'd be nice if we had a business rule where we could do that. Or if you wanted to do access management within FootPrints, and again, be able to automate the permissions. We can easily automate, hey, this user now has access to this system. We have the link existing record action, but to automate the removal of access at the moment cannot, because we don't have this this action type. Moving on to the next one, allow system administrators to use concurrent license types. Now, this is a fairly minor feature request, but it can have some implications depending on how your license allocations are. So to create a system administrator account, even though you'll see in the UI, there is the option to choose fixed or concurrent. If you do choose concurrent, you will get the error as presented on screen here, forcing you to use a fixed license. Now, no real problems there. That's industry best practice. Your system administrators should never be on a concurrent license because you want to make sure they can always log into the system. However, that can cause problems with smaller organizations using FootPrints where they may plan to have 5 people on their service desk use 5 named licenses. So they only purchase 5 named licenses, but then they realize they need maybe 1 or 2 or 3 more licenses for their system administrators if they're not the same person, or if they want those persons to have dual accounts. So this is a feature request to essentially bring that back. You can kind of see here in the description, it used to be available, and then that behavior was changed. Next one up is button to show the show all button on your journalized fields. So you may have seen this with your journalized fields, description field, public notes field, internal notes field, any field that you create in journal. Below it, you'll have the history. You kind of see it from the screenshot here. Now, by default, the history will only show the 5 latest entries in that field. If there are more entries than 5, the remaining ones are hidden. And in order to see them, you have to press this show all button. So this feature request here is just adding more capabilities or functionalities to that show all. So for starters, there's no way to tell from the UI whether the button is actually turned on or off. So we would like to see that, as well as options to say, maybe there's 100 entries in here and I only want to see, the most recent 10 or 15 or something like that. So that's what this feature here is for. Next one, default filtering on link controls. So this is one of my favorites here. This mostly has to do with, think of the link control that you would have on your address book contacts. So if you think to your incident form, in the contact information section, you're going to have a link control that points back to the contact. And generally speaking, one ticket, one contact, you'd have your contact there. You can then, if you wanted to see that contact, open up that address book record, you can double click on that row in the link control and open up the contact record. Now, if you've configured it as such, that contact record would then have a link control showing, pointing back to incidents. And so the typical use case here would be, you want to offer a little bit of that white glove service, right? So I'm going to use Layla here as my example. So if I'm a member of the service desk and Layla is an end user who's calling in, I'm working with her on a ticket. Once I've resolved the ticket, or I'm done working with the ticket, I might be interested to see what other open tickets Layla has and offer to work on those, right? And so normally the way you would do that is open up Layla's contact record, look at the link control to see if she has any other open incidents, and then work on those. Unfortunately, link controls don't have filters, default filters on them. So the link control would show Layla's all of the incidents that are linked to Layla. And so if Layla's been here for several years, you might have a dozen or more, or 100 or more incidents in that list, with probably 3/4 or more of those, 90% of those all closed out already. And so you're having to scroll up and down looking for the ones that are still open. Now, of course, we do have workarounds to that, like you can just use some views, do some searches, things like that. But it would be nice to be able to just open up her contact record and just see the open tickets. So that's what this feature request here is for. Of course, there's other use cases for that, but this is the most common one. Next one, property role, essentially a role permission to see and hide voting history. This one here is kind of neat. We do have some workarounds for that. I believe I had presented one of them on an earlier version of this webinar or session of this webinar. But essentially, viewing the history of voting is essentially in the ticket history. And ticket history, there's no permissions for that. Everyone who has access to the form, if that history section is on the form, they would see it. So this feature request is about being able to make that granular so that we can potentially hide the voting history to certain users. So depending on how you're using the system, you might want the submitter of a request, change request or some other process that you've developed, you might want them to be able to see the final result of the vote, right? Whether their request was approved or rejected, but without them seeing who voted what individually. So that's what this feature request here is for. So that's the 5 feature requests I have for you today. So unlinking a record, system administrators to use concurrent licenses, the show all button to be a little bit more functional, default filtering on link controls, and being able to control via permission the voting history. Okay, next up, my first topic for today is going to be custom SQL. So for that, I have a post on communities. I did this about 2 years ago. I had done this at the time. A client I was working with was interested in some specific functionality that was not available in FootPrints. And having worked with FootPrints since the redesign version 12 in 2012, 2014, I've become very familiar with it, specifically the back end. And so I don't shy away from doing customizations to provide additional functionalities. Some of that would be, like I had shown in some of the prior webinars, things like counting your license usage, tracking who's customized their UI, showing approval histories in a fashion that's better than just in the history section, preventive maintenance, tracking in who logs in and out and how long they've been in the system. There's probably about 24 different customizations that I've done, mostly within the FootPrints Advanced Starter template, and some of that like sort of this example here as an offshoot for a particular customer. I do have to preface this with, this is customization, not configuration. If you're not familiar with the difference, configuration is anything that you can do within the system itself, within the UI, creating a field, creating a business rule, a saved search, a new role, et cetera, et cetera. Configuration is 100% supported. It persists via upgrades. There's never any issues, right? And if there is an issue, you contact support. Customization, on the other hand, customization that you do yourself, that you're pretty much on your own, right? So if you start doing some customization, such as what I'm going to show you a little bit here, you cannot go to your support provider and request support. Now, depending who your support provider is, they might try to help you out a little bit, but they're really under no obligation because that's customization. So this is a little bit of an intro on how to do that, because once you're aware of, essentially the main limitation, which is you're on your own, you can do some incredibly powerful things with this that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do with the FootPrints business logic. So I had wrote up this post about 2 years ago, kind of documenting a little bit the process and providing an example via the PDF here. So in this particular PDF example is about displaying the number of attachments linked to a record, and which was essentially based off of a feature request here. If I pull this up here, I don't even remember the details or if I've shown this one here before, but essentially this was a request I guess some other systems, or maybe, I'm just looking now in the notes, it looks like maybe version 11 had this, where when you're looking at your list of tickets, there would be a column that shows you how many attachments are linked to the record. Hey, this ticket has 0 attachments. This one has 1, this one has 2, et cetera, et cetera. And depending on your workflow, you'd kind of be able to tell, okay, yeah, I have nothing to do with this ticket because there's only 1 attachment, and I have nothing to do until there's 2 attachments or something like that. So that was kind of the use case. So essentially, I wrote the procedure on how to do that. So maybe what I'll do here, before I present the PDF any further here, let me just post into the chat the link for that, in case you guys sort of want to follow along. Now, obviously, I'm not going to show you how to do that, step by step here in this webinar. We just don't have time. The step by step is the document here. So I'm just going to quickly present that. And again, this is showing off one example of what you can do. There's the sky's the limit, essentially. Most of the customizations I do, actually all of the customizations I do, are exclusively in SQL. Almost all of those are SQL triggers. Though I do have a few that are stored procedures as well. If you're familiar with how to create triggers and all that, like, you're already far ahead in all this. And that's why, whenever I deliver training to our clients, we always include part of the database so you can understand the back end, and strongly recommend that, whoever the administrator is would have at least fundamental knowledge of SQL. So this basically just provides you sort of a step-by-step on how to build this out. So, if I were to show you basically, describing what the situation is, and then essentially showing what the end result would be. So you can kind of see here, if I zoom this in a little bit, the end result is I now have a column that says number of attachments, and I have a count based on the number of attachments that is in the ticket. So that's what we're aiming for. Now, in order to do some customization like this, generally, you're going to have to do your design, your build in FootPrints first. So for example, in this here, before I even get to building the SQL trigger or doing any of the actual customization, I have to create the field in FootPrints first, based on whatever it is I'm trying to do. So in this case here, I have to build a number field first, or like in this example, I did as a simple text because there's no necessarily reason to do it as a number, but you can also do it as a number based on what you're trying to do. But whatever it is, you should do your build in FootPrints first, publish it, and then you can see, there it is, right? And you can obviously see that, hey, I've added an attachment and there's no logic to it, right? I haven't built any business rules in FootPrints to do this, because of course, using business rules, I cannot get this, which is why we're going on customization. So next up is building the actual customization. And I walk you through the steps on how to do for this particular example. So first, maybe we need some information, some back-end IDs on how to do that. And then here, if I keep kind of going on, I show you then, in order to find out how many attachments are a ticket, we're going, for this example, into the file info table, where the file info URI matches essentially the definition ID, this number over here, of the service desk, right, of the container, which is the service desk, and then of this one here of my item. And then you can see them right here. And so this particular query returned 1 row. So this particular ticket has one attachment to it. So next up, we go through building the trigger. So building triggers, again, if you're familiar at least a little bit with SQL, building triggers is not all that complicated. Now, the nature of a SQL trigger, because you can see here, we're building a trigger on a specific table. So the building a trigger is essentially like building a business rule, an after save business rule, right? It's going to have some criteria. It's going to have some actions. You can see that a little bit down below. So, once we create the trigger, it basically samples this text for us here, right? And then we just have to modify it as needed. So you can see I've kind of identified all of the aspects of it, right? So it's an update trigger, meaning it will not occur on initial creation. And then in here is where I would add my actions. What do I want this quote unquote business rule to do? And then you can see this is essentially what I've wanted it to do. So we're going out to that file info table for that container, that item, where the ID is for the record that was just updated. And then we're doing a count. How many rows exist? Oh, there's 2 rows, meaning there's 2 attachments. Then we're updating the ticket. We're updating that field that we created, setting the number to the count. The end result, well, I kind of showed you the end result already, but you can see it there, right? So here's what my form looks like, right? I've added my 2 attachments. I've hit save. There is a little bit of a caveat here. When I hit save, the number will not show up. It is there, it's in the database, but FootPrints doesn't see it yet. So what you have to do, and I've kind of elaborated it here, you do have to click the refresh button. So once you click the refresh button, then the number shows up. And that's essentially because when you're hitting save, right? I mean, FootPrints is not expecting you to do this customization. Can't necessarily fault them for that. But what's happening is when you hit save, FootPrints says, well, on the UI, you didn't touch this field. So I don't have to put any update to the database for this field. And consequently, I don't have to look at the database to see if the field was updated. And so that's why, it doesn't show up. And then you hit the refresh button and there you go. So brief little intro on some customization there. This can obviously be a very daunting subject. It's one of those, with great power comes great responsibility and great not risk, but great, having to learn a whole new thing, right? But you can follow this example here step by step and get familiar with it. And then at that point, if you're comfortable and you want to grow on this, again, the amount of capabilities that you can add to this, to FootPrints are exponential. There's so much that you can do with this. Again, the main things just to be aware of is this is customization. So you are on your own. You can reach out to your support provider if you have an issue, but they're under no obligation to support you. You can reach out to the community, see if someone else has done something like that. Maybe you get something like that. Google is always your friend, especially when it comes to crafting your SQL queries and learning about the different functions that you might need to use, like a count function or something else like that. And lastly, any change that your custom SQL is doing, the FootPrints business logic is not aware of. And so what I mean by that is if I take the example, let me go back up to the very top here where we were looking at it, over here, right? So that's great. We've seen this code here, and I can have it set the number of attachments. Hey, now it's 2. If I create a business rule that says send an email after save when the number of attachments field changes, well, that business rule will never run because the business rule engine is not aware that this has actually changed. If you did it as a time-based business rule, that would be different. But as an after save business rule or an on-screen business rule, it would never work because it's not aware of the change. So keep those 2 things in mind when you develop some of this. I believe I have it in this intro guide as well. Yeah, so you've got our contact information here, as well as it's on the intro page of this webinar and in the emails that you guys have gotten. So if ever you have questions on this or like some what ifs that you'd like to understand, feel free to either shoot me an email, post a question on communities. Definitely be cautious about what you do with customization, but don't be afraid of it either. All right, so I'm going to move on to my next topic for today. So modifying the default system portal. So for that, let me scrounge up my FootPrints environment. Okay, so I'm going to move this over here. Okay, so if I were to log into FootPrints, now I'm logging into the FootPrints Advanced Starter template here. You'll notice, so I'm going to log in as an administrative user. Depending on what your environment is, you may notice one thing especially here. So once I log in, now apologies, this is running on my local VM, so it's always a little bit sluggish the first time. Once I log in as an administrator, I'm not going to be presented with the home console, which is what you would typically see, in a FootPrints, in a regular FootPrints install. Even if you log in as your administrator and you go to the default system portal, you're going to be on the home console first. And then, of course, you're probably logging in to do some administration work. So then you got to click on administration. So here you can see it sent me there right away. A couple other things you might notice is, for one, default system portal. If I go to my list of portals over here, I don't have a default system portal. I find that name is terrible. So essentially, we've renamed it System Administrator. We've also put in a logo, changed the theme, added some additional consoles to it. All things that normally you cannot do because the portal cannot be edited or deleted, right? So if I try to edit this portal, you would get this pop-up. You guys might be familiar with that. There is a way around this. Now, I do have to preface this with, you have to be careful with this. Again, similar to what I mentioned with the custom coding, with great power comes great responsibility. Now, this is not necessarily custom coding per se, but we do have to make a tweak into the database for this to work. So again, just be aware of it, but don't be afraid to do this because you can do so much with this, right? Like having the administration console be the one that shows up at the top, saving you a click every time you log in, or putting in your company logo so that it matches with the rest of the system, or adding some other consoles that you might frequently use that you would want to show up as well. So in order to make this change here, you do have to go to SQL. Now I have it coming up, but of course SQL is never quick to load there, so bear with me. Okay. So you go into your database. Once it comes up over here, database, you're going to go to your tables, and the table we're looking for obviously is the table that stores portals. That table is system.portal. So I'm looking for FPSC DB001 _system.portal. So I'm going to scroll down over to it. So there it is over here. Now, I like to edit this table. Oh, sorry, here, close that out. I like to edit this table rather than create an update statement. It's easier here. So you right click on it, you do edit top 200 rows. And then you're going to see list of portals over here. And then you're going to see the names here. This would normally be default system portal. You can see here is system true. Everything else is false. This is the locking mechanism. So I can essentially unlock this portal by switching this to false. As easy as that. You type in false, down arrow to commit the change in the database. This change is live. So I don't have to do anything, restart SQL or anything like that. Restart Tomcat or anything like that. So I close out of my portal. Now, if I go back in, I can make some changes to it now. So you can do that to unlock it. The important thing here, once you are done, you have to relock the portal. So if I change this, and I do test and I save here, once I'm done here, I have to relock the portal. So I'm going to come back over here. I do have to reload this screen because changes have occurred. So you can either just close out of it and open it up again, or you can do your Alt-X keyboard shortcut to execute. But now I'm going to come back in here and I'm going to lock it again. And now when it's locked, I can no longer edit it. So the easy way to change that. The reason I do say you have to relock it, and you have to be careful with this. So you have to ensure this portal is locked. You also have to ensure this is the only portal that is locked. So don't try to lock some other ones. And the reason for this is when you run an upgrade to FootPrints. Now, I don't know why, again, this is customization. So I'm on my own. BMC won't necessarily help me here. But essentially, when the upgrade runs, they have a query that is looking for exactly one row in this table to be locked. And so if there's 0 or if there's more than 1, the upgrade fails. So again, don't let that scare you, but just be aware that once you're done making your tweak, go ahead and lock it again. And so that allows you to do, again, like I said, you can change the name, call it something a little bit more meaningful. You can throw on your logo in there. You can add and remove consoles or change the order. A lot of very beneficial stuff there. Okay, so that's it for being able to modify the system portal. The last topic for today is going to be on business rules, what I'm going to call regular business rules and workflow business rules. So for that, I'm going to go into my service desk container and show off an example here. So what I mean by regular business rules are going to be any of the business rules not associated to a workflow. So you can see here when I go to my business rules, I have 4 groups. 3 of those groups are rules associated with a workflow. So these are what I'm calling the workflow rules. And then this one over here is what I'm calling the regular rules. So there's often situations where you can build some functionality by building a rule in a workflow, and you can build it outside of a workflow. A common example of that, if I go into my workflow, is let's take some of these ones here. Completed, right? So if I looked in my completed, I have notify contact on completion, let's say, right? So this is a workflow business rule on this stage of the workflow. If I look at this rule, I have triggers on enter, which is unique to workflows, right? Typically, this would be after save, time-based, on item update, on copy, things like that. So we do have some different triggers here in a workflow, notably, these 3 over here. But whatever this particular rule is doing, which, self-explanatory by looking at the name here, this is going to notify the contact when the status is completion. And so you can see I did it this way. It's a workflow rule on enter. The notify contact has to be equal to always or just this time. And then I send the email. As simple as that. I could have built this rule outside of a workflow as well. So to give you a quick example of what that would have looked like, I could have gone into my business rules, new after save rule, notify contact on completion. And I would have done something like this. I would have done after save, probably not on create, but you never know. So I'll turn it on. My criteria is going to be something along the lines of status changed from any value to completed. And then my action is to send email. All right, send email to address in a field, close, completed contact, field name, email address, normal. Now I could have done it this way. Actually, to be completely accurate, I need an extra criteria over here, or changed from no value to completed. Need to cover my bases. So I could have done the rule this way. Now this rule or the other rule functionally are identical. So then the question comes, should I do it in the workflow or should I do it not in the workflow? And there's no fast answer to that. There's no necessarily right or wrong. It's going to depend. So for example, you can see right away, this rule here is a little bit more complicated than the one that existed in the workflow. Not by much, but it's a little bit more complicated. So doing it in the workflow is simpler in a way. However, and I'm going to now get out of this rule over here. However, if I had multiple workflows, like in change management, change control, I have multiple workflows. Now, all of a sudden, instead of just having one business rule, assuming you want the functionality to exist in all workflows, you would have to create 3 business rules. So now it's no longer simpler to create the rule in the workflow. It'd be simpler to create it outside of the workflow. But if you also just want it to fire on, for example, these 2, and you don't want to fire it over here, then it's probably simpler to have 2 simple rules in separate workflows rather than have one slightly more complicated rule not in the workflow, but that's really going to come down to your own personal preferences as you're administrating the system. So there's obviously some reasons to create a rule within a workflow versus outside of a workflow, depending on the actions that you need or the triggers that you need. But oftentimes there's rules that you can create either in or out of a workflow. And again, there's no necessarily right or wrong way to do it. It's really going to determine based on your personal preferences. So hopefully that sheds a little bit of light as to when to use one or the other. And that also brings us to the end of our session for this month. So as always, you'll be able to view this recording later. And I'm just checking here my chat. I think, did I place, where's my chat? Did I place, where's the chat? Yeah, so I did not. So let me give you right away the link for session 5. So I'll post that in the chat now so that you guys can click on it. But of course, at the end of this webinar, when you get sort of like that automated email, I believe the link is included there as well. The recording will be up on our website, rjrnovations.com/webinars. As usual, give us a couple days, get it processed and all that stuff. It'll be up there. You can also see recordings from all the prior webinars, and you can see the information for next month's webinar. So thank you for attending. Have a great rest of your day.